Hey guys, Mrs. Gore here to talk about Chapter 6 of Night with you. So, we left off Chapter 5 when they were leaving the camp to begin the death marches. So if you remember back to when we first started this unit, you watched the video over the phases of the Holocaust, and this was definitely a phase of it, the death marches. Like I said, a lot of prisoners, this is where they lost their lives, and unfortunately we see a good glimpse of that in Chapter 6. So, as the prisoners are marching in Chapter 6, it's snowing heavily. They're in very little clothing. They're not in coats. It's not like they have snow boots, things like that. But the thing that's keeping them going is they know that if they stop marching, when in reality they're running, they're going to be shot. The SS will shoot anyone who steps out of line, anyone who doesn't follow their orders. And then you have other people who are just stopping because they're exhausted and they're being trampled over by the other people running because they just refuse to stop. And we've seen this for some time now. One second. Sorry. We've seen this for some time now. But this is the epitome of survival of the fittest. We know these people have been brainwashed. They have been oppressed to a sense where the only thing on their mind is survival. But this is that heightened version of I will do whatever it takes to keep myself alive. And Ellie says the only thing that's keeping him moving, that's not stopping him from just stopping and accepting death, is his dad's presence. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people feel the opposite. They feel like their parents are slowing them down. They're older. They're weaker. We see the example of this when they stop at the abandoned village, and the rabbi comes to ask them if they've seen his son. So they're in this abandoned village. They finally get to stop marching. They've been marching for miles. And when the rabbi comes to them, Ellie and his father say, no, they haven't seen his son. And then Ellie suddenly remembers that he saw the son and the rabbi get separated, and he saw the son purposefully look back and run faster away from his dad. And Ellie kind of has this moment where he prays to God and says, please don't let me do that. Do not let me turn my eye on my own father. And I know we've had many discussions this year about our parents and our loved ones and standing up for each other. So I just want you to grasp that moment, how oppressed and how close to death these people are, how close to death you have to be willing to sacrifice your parent or to want to separate yourself from them because you feel like they're a negative part of your identity right now. That's a huge part. When we first met Ellie, his dad was such a positive part of his being, of his identity, and now he sees him as a negative. He has to take care of him. He's weak. However, Ellie and his dad are still together. They try to rest a bit in the abandoned village, but they don't want to fall asleep. They notice as people are falling asleep, they're dying. They're sleeping in the snow and not waking up. So they keep each other awake. And then they're told it's time to march again. So their end goal is Gleiwitz. It's another concentration camp that's they're going to be moved to, and they do eventually arrive. However, when they arrive there, it's awful. A lot of people die as soon as they get into the gates. They're waiting to shower and things like that, and they're just all piled on top of each other. When they do eventually get in the bunk, same thing. Their bodies are piled on top of each other, and for a moment, Ellie almost dies. He loses his breath. But he does end up being reunited with Juliek, which is crazy, the violin player from before. He is underneath Ellie, and somehow out of everything that's going on and all of the trauma, all of the lack of possessions, he still has his violin. And he plays the violin through the night. When Ellie wakes up, Juliek has passed and his violin is crushed next to him. And Ellie says seeing the violin crushed like that is almost harder than seeing Juliek dead next to him. They end up staying at the camp for 3 days, and they don't have any food, any water the entire time. Ellie's dad's health is really declining at this point. He's really weak. All he wants to do is sleep and rest. He's really kind of given up the fight in a sense, but his body's just so depleted. They decide after the third day that they're going to move them. Their goal is to get all these prisoners to the center of Germany, more into German territory, so that way as these armies come, the Germans can fight them off and keep them. oppressed like they are. So they have one final selection process. Ellie's dad is chosen for selection, and Ellie chooses to kind of blur up the lines, and thankfully saves his dad, and they both make it onto the cattle cars. But the cattle cars now, he says 100 per cart. Remember, there was 80 on the way, but he says they're so skinny they fit. But they're all open in the top, so all the snow is just falling in. And that's how they're going to travel now. They don't know exactly where they're headed, but they're headed towards the center of Germany, and that's where chapter 6 ends.